Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni. My name is Kevin Kumire, and I will be your moderator for tonight. Tonight's session focuses on understanding colonization through the lens of language. What role did language play in the colonization of Africa? Did the colonial language imposed on Africa set a tone of the erosion of the African culture? Prof Mandi Rukuni will unpack this topic and answer some of the questions that many of us have. He'll give us a 40-minute presentation. After the 40-minute presentation, we will open up the floor for discussion, and our session will close at 7:30. For those who want to ask questions or want to contribute, please use the hand reaction button, and the floor will be given to you to speak. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Over to Prof. Mandi.
Thanks, Kevin. Greetings, colleagues. So last week we discussed the issue of colonial trauma as the trigger point for the colonial mind. In other words, we cannot really fully reverse the colonial mind until we understand how trauma caused it. And the use of foreign language in our systems makes it even more difficult for us to traumatize the dominance of these systems in our mindsets in favor of our own, because there is a strong relationship between colonial trauma and language. See, because language is a strong instrument for self-belief and self-confidence in a society. So by enforcing foreign languages, colonialism basically created a vehicle to drive African societies. And there's therefore a deep need to restore the understanding of how indigenous knowledge will be our savior, and how that rich local language content has shaped our society in the past and will still be able to do so moving on. So we will be coming back to this way forward towards the end. So I will today, or probably half of my talk today, is thoroughly informed by Googie or Tiang's series of public lectures and his celebrated essay on decolonizing the mind, but just with the specific focus on language and culture. I mean, I've read, there are many good scholars, analysts on this issue, but in my opinion, Googie is just a class on his own. And for those of us who want to go deeper in this issue, we will be in future actually going deeper into all the thinkers and so on and way forward. But I was just saying, no better African to address this issue than Googie. But Googie considers, in his particular case, because he's Kenyan, so English was the colonizing language, and basically he identifies English as a cultural bomb that will continue to wipe out the pre-colonial histories and identities, because what that succeeds in depreciating us is that we then believe our history only started with colonization, you see. So the effect of this cultural bomb is to annihilate our people's belief in our own names, languages, in our understanding of the environment, our heritage, even understanding of how we were united in the past and can still be united in the future. But language is powerful and has been used to even get us to question our own capabilities. And that's really the power of language. So the next slide, please. So the issue then becomes, if you can put on the next slide, please. Let me switch on to. So language is the carrier of culture, you see, because language communicates culture through orature and literature. The entire body of values of a people by which we perceive ourselves and our place in the world is contained in language. Language is thus inseparable from ourselves as a community of human beings with specific characters, with specific histories, and with specific relationships with the world. So most people actually treat language or believe that language is the most important tool used to give identity to a nation, to a people, to a culture. Language is a deep relationship with the mind, with the soul, with identity, and the intellect of those who speak their mother tongue. So when you learn a new language, you also learn much about a new culture. When you learn a new language, it can, except that it does not help if learning a new language makes you look down upon your own mother tongue. That's the problem, because language contains much more. Let's take, the example used by Gardner and Rowe. The language used by Eskimos, for instance, has many words for snow, many more words than you find used by the English or the Norwegians or the other Europeans, because snow is such a big deal. Just like English, they only have one word for banana. But here in Africa, in East Africa, for instance, where banana is a huge part of the culture, there are many words. Kiswahili has more than 20 words to describe banana. And in other languages, like they cite here this Tanzanian language, Kichaga, where there's even more words for different types of bananas. So when a language dies, concepts belonging to that culture die with it. There are some analysts who even relate the death in the use of a language, especially of really indigenous cultures who are close to the environment, that when their language dies, diversity also dies, biodiversity dies, because at the end of it all, the deep understanding of a local ecosystem will be contained in the language. And when you have a new foreign language come in, they only understand a little bit because they are looking for a much less focus on maybe just exploitation of the environment. So pregnant with wisdom. In my own linguistic group, the Shona groups, Sumone Madimikira, the folk tales, riddles, they're pregnant with wisdom, helping, mentoring people from youth across all aspects of social life, politics, legal issues, interpersonal relationships. But what has happened is after colonialism replaced our general understanding of what they call our constitution, the legal traditions and systems we then acquired from Europe, the laws, we forget that these are born out of their own legal traditions. And they're not, therefore, even if we adopt them, they're not capable of actually harnessing the wisdom from local languages. So it is something that we have lost, because this self-counseling capacity and self-directed knowledge, which comes through language you hear daily before you even go to a cold school, that's been lost. So it's a big loss to society. So yes, language is power. For every linguistic group, language is power. But when a single language, such as English or French, is then used to colonize and create a bilingualism, then you have cultural imperialism based on language, which basically, as scholars would say, I'm quoting here Zumaria Pace, an imposition of one language on another, a reassertion and reconstruction of structural inequalities in our society today in, say, English-speaking and French-speaking Africa. You will see that those structures are by language, by foreign language, because it goes back to the colonial usage of the language to divide people socially and economically. So those cultural products that are brought in through foreign language are used as instruments of further ideological control. Assume that globalization actually is not niche or language is used in the globalization process. It is more of gobbling and globalization of other cultures, because those doctrines carried through by language intensify the already sharp divide between rich countries and poor countries. So as Googie or Tiang would say, those of us who have adopted English as our official national languages, it's a Trojan horse. It's an invisible fist that will punch you at every turn. And we then forget that it was initially forced on us through trauma. And that trauma keeps telling us today, whether consciously or unconsciously, it tells you English is equivalent to intelligence. English is equivalent to superiority. Okay, whether you think so explicitly or implicitly, is there. So there lies the importance of your mother tongue. It's deep in the subconscious mind, which is 90% of who you are, is your subconscious mind. How you think, how you act or react, how you behave goes all the way back to how you were culturalized through your mother tongue. It is the place of natural intelligence that you go to naturally. As somebody was saying just to me recently, it's your Google search. When the first thing that happens, you cry for your mother, because your Google search for crisis immediately goes back to mother. You know, so same applies to all aspects of social and economic life. Your mother tongue is your Google language. That's how you go back into your subconscious mind to retrieve deep-seated knowledge, information, skills that you acquired when you're young. So most of the answers to our day-to-day lives don't lie in the education we got in the formal schools. They lie deep inside. And that's the most important intelligence, because it instinctively guides you towards self-reinforcing processes. That's how you enhance your creativity. That's how you self-heal. Your body heals when it is most comfortable with itself, intellectually, spiritually, physically. And as Nelson Mandela said, if you speak to someone in a language they understand, it goes to their head. They understand what you're saying. But when you speak to them in their mother tongue, you go straight to their heart. That's what we are losing by having these foreign official languages. And if you look at the history books, if you look at the daily news, if you look at the foreign inflow of social media, the greatest lies about Africa, the greatest misunderstanding about Africa is almost always created in foreign language. This in one's own language, because you wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here if it was that bad. So colonial trauma, as we discussed last week, was deeply distressing, an overwhelming experience. They drill it into you for day on end, harassing you, humiliating you, physical injury, damage, shocking, all that suffering and worrying and confusion does lead to that loss of confidence, which then makes it easier on the part of the colonizing strategy to devalue your own language, our languages, and make it seem like you can never get international recognition by sticking to your language. It has to be somebody else's language. But we'll talk about how way forward in a few minutes. But we have lost a huge amount of indigenous knowledge at every turn, whether in terms of social, cultural systems, the environment and the ecosystem, and all that. All that was deeply embedded in the languages. So it is against this background today that I say it's not feasible for Africans to say we understand the mental model, we understand the colonial mindset, if we don't understand how it was crafted using trauma and how the traumatization through language further erodes and plays a continued role in devaluing ourselves. So, as I already promised earlier, I will be going into a number of very insightful nuggets from Googie Tiang's public lectures, which I encourage you to really go into. Just Google his public lectures, and there's so much there. Because Googie, basically his understanding of this colonial imperialism is deep in his work. And he says imperialism disrupts the entire fabric of the lives of its victims, in particular the culture, making us ashamed of our names, of our history, of our belief systems, language, our art, dance, song, culture, even sculpture, even the color of our skins. It's towards all its victims. In terms of means of survival, and furthermore, this then reinforces and employs a kind of racism. So during colonial times, the African child learned to associate her own language or his own language with a low status, with humiliation, even corporal punishment by the school captains and headmasters. And if you spoke in your own language in the colonial school, it was considered some low level of intelligence, or sometimes downright stupidity. So this was reinforced, of course, by then rewarding those who would speak in English. They get higher marks. They are highly rewarded through prizes, and the entire the prospects of climbing up the educational ladder was based on the English language rather than on any other form of intelligence. And as you know, the end result is when one's language is denigrated, the one that you use for daily communication, and if it's not deemed to be fit as a language of instruction in the schooling system, it does make one feel that, well, they themselves are also equally denigrated. So at home, and I am part of the generation where we led this dual life that Ngugi talks about, because at home and in the field, especially say in our preschool days before we went to school, language was what the mother and father spoke. And those evening teachings, storytelling, connected us to the wider community. It was the one language that you employed, not just to work, but to learn and to develop your interpersonal skills. Then when we go to school, this harmony was broken, because now education is no longer the same language you speak at home. It's not the language of your culture. So it is this disconnection, even in the slightest form, from a school child's written world and learning world to the world they understand when they are with family and community. So this disassociation of the sensibility of the child from his or her natural and social environment is basically what we are calling colonial alienation. Yeah. So, as you well know, the colonial system of education, if you slap apartheid and Russia, discrimination on it, became the structure of the pyramid world that we live in today, with a broad base at the bottom of people who don't speak the language, the foreign language, or don't speak it well, to a secondary meeting. A very, very narrow percentage who get university education and entirely 100% in a foreign language. So no wonder then the colonial experience of language made Europe the center of the universe, because the entire teaching of history, geography, music, etc., was all centered around Europe, and the divorce from the immediate environment becomes clearer when we look at how the colonial language failed to carry our local cultures. But as said earlier, culture is a product of history, or a people's history, and in turn reflects that. And now the child being exposed external to oneself, it's a form of further trauma. Or he or she is made to stand outside herself or himself, and as Bob Dixon in his book says, catch them young, which is something we'll talk about shortly when we look at the way forward. Catch them young, so that from a young age they understand that they're outside. They are not in the same class. What they're aiming for is truly a colonial dream that is beyond them. Language, thus, is inseparable from ourselves as a community of human beings, especially here in Africa still, in terms of our specific forms of being, characters, history. All that is still there. We may not be actively re-engaging it, but it's there. So, because that collective memory is what was truncated by colonialism. And if we fail to understand Pan-Africanism from that standpoint, I'm probably going to say something a bit controversial, because I don't believe that Pan-Africanism is going to succeed through some kind of political process of the Africa Union on its own. The Africa Union has to actually tip the whole thing upside down and understand that the collective memory bank of people is what brings them together. So as long as we continue to use tools that further differentiate us rather than bring a collective memory of who we are and where we have come from, that regenesis is going to be a bit difficult. So, and on this aspect, Googie or Tiang sees language rather than history or culture as the enabling condition for human consciousness at a higher level. So that he says the choice of language and the use of language is central to a people's definition of themselves in relation to the entire universe. That's why he says it is enabling condition for human consciousness. Hence, language has always been at the heart of the two contending social forces in Africa in the 21st century. So in trying to map up a way forward, what do we need to remember or value moving on? Here the following, I'm quoting from a number of other sources as well as Ngugi, the things that we need to remember and value moving on. First, as Ngugi says, if you don't know your mother language, your mother tongue, the language of your culture, you will be enslaved forever. You think maybe one day we'll get out of it, but forever. If you know the languages of the world, but you don't know your mother tongue, that is an enslavement. That's not empowerment. If you know your mother tongue and you add all the other languages of the world, then it's empowerment. We must reverse the trend of African parents not teaching our children in their mother tongue, okay? Because this idea of my language is more language than yours that we get from the colonial thing is complete rubbish. We must stop believing that. It is nonsense that in order for English to be, African languages must cease to be. It's nonsense. We must also remember the following, and as Nui would, I'm quoting from Nui, humans will avoid pain and embrace oppression, generation upon generation, original sin forgotten as habit setting. So, and Googie adds, we have normalized the abnormalities of the colonial experience. That's what we have done through trauma. And he goes on to say, how is it that in a country that is 70% Black, the native language or native tongue of less than 8% of the populace binds the nation? How is that? And then we in Africa as well. And Googie says, well, speaking broken English, but that is understandable, say for the Mexicans. They actually think it's sexy. But in Africa, if you speak broken English, they think you are illiterate or not intelligent. Okay, so Ngugi says, so while African leaders perfect their accents, Europeans sharpen their tools for accessing our resources. Okay, they just sharpen to access the resources. So my last two slides then focus on a quick generic articulation of what are some of the long-term and short-term actions that we need to take on this language issue. Language is a long-term issue, but it needs immediate attention. It cannot be a 10-year agenda. It is a 50, 100 more. You have to break 2-3 generations into dealing with this language issue, because using a mother tongue elevates creativity, opens the mind. Okay, that's the internal language, the language that one dreams in. So we need to make it cool again, and we need to make it clever again to know one's mother tongue or an African language. I would also say when it comes to people say at least 1,000 languages in Africa. I have written a book on being African. In spite of so many linguistic groups and cultural differences, the essential elements that makes us African are the same. So we should not be afraid to code switch. Even in schools, I'm an advocate now for let children, even from preschool to school, use more than 1, 2, 3 languages at a time, as long as there's capacity to communicate and cross. They should get them to use Shona, Debele, Swati, Tswana, as long as that school environment is capable of continuously being able to help and assist interpret, because by switching, code switching actually means within society, at home and on the street, people are using languages interchangeably. And that includes words that we get from foreign languages. We should just spell them with our local, alphabet, or on way of pronouncing them, and make them African words. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, especially if the base is a local language or an African language. I would also want to propose that African Union itself should not just have Swahili as one of the official languages and then continue to use all these other foreign languages for the actual business. I think people should be, it can't be that expensive to translate any language to all the other important African languages, or at least initially to Swahili, and then make that the primary language, So Africa really has to protect its resources, starting with our languages and cultures, It's the means of exchange on everything, including economic. So I would say if we start making our national official languages, their local languages, and then English and French and so on, actually are foreign languages. In other words, in the school system, we teach in the local language and teach English and French as foreign languages. It's also a mindset thing. The fact that we will continue speaking English is not the point. The important point initially is to say, you learn it as a foreign language, but it's not your primary language of education and learning and communication. I think we need to make that shift, because that is what shifts all the entire mindsets, political, social, and so on. As Googie says, I've never heard of an African country going to Europe to drill oil in Amsterdam or London, or you just don't. Okay, why? Because it's etched in your mind. It's not for us to go and drill oil where they are. It's for them to come and do it here. We are just kind of like custodians for them to come and have these resources. Because if we really had all our economic literature in our local languages, we would make a lot of money even just getting documents to their own languages. They should come and pay for these documents to be translated for them. That's another business for us. Then catch them young, I've already pointed that. Between the ages of 0 to 7 are the most important periods in one's life. This is when literally 80% of your subconscious mind is fixed by the time you're 7. You have another 10% to add on as you grow through habits and new habits, but you are practically done by the age of 7. So that is when we should be teaching everything from preschool to school in the local language and telling them you can learn the other languages as foreign languages. Okay. So that's where I think we should be going. Scholarship in Africa must engage in the long history. We must go back to where our own story and our own narrative was broken and start recreating it back. We just have to do it. We have to tell our own stories. We can't have everyone telling our story for ourselves. And finally, millions of our people are rendered mute or deaf because 90% of Africans don't speak these foreign languages. And yet our government and official languages are all, those are the primary languages for business. We must give these people back their voice. Thank you very much. Actually, before I go, let me just tell you a nice, quick little story about the book I wrote about 10 years ago now, Being African. It was actually a big lesson for me on language, because I had been telling lots of stories. Actually happened when I was still working for this organization, where each time we were preparing for board meetings and big events, our report writers and so on, I would sit down with them. I was kind of like the leader in the office, and I would tell these African stories to explain some of the key concepts. And after a while, they started saying to me, why don't you write a book about this story, this African, basically being African? And I said, why do you need to write a book? Every African knows this. They said, no. We need to write a book. You need to write a book. Then when I eventually agreed to write the book, I could not write the book. I had a writer's block. I would try and write for a period of 3 years. I failed to write the book until some psychologist said to me, you know what? You're trying to write this book? Do you realize that you cannot write this book unless if you write it in your own mother tongue? And he said to me, I know you think it's not possible because now you have had 40 years of education and interaction as a professional using a foreign language, but just try that. And lo and behold, I remember taking a group of youth. I used to do a lot of leadership training then. I took them to the mountains here in Zimbabwe, in the highlands, for 6 days, and I did not speak any other language to them except my mother tongue. I finished that exercise. 10 days later, the book was in my head, 100%. And I was able to write the book in 48 hours. I couldn't write the book in 3 years, because I had written it in my language and then translated it back to English. So yes, it's living proof for myself. In fact, I wrote those 2 little books, Being African. Initially, I wrote it using a publisher in Pretoria. Eventually, Penguin published both of my books, Being African there and Leading Africa. If you Google them, read them, you will know that I could not write these books until I sat down and wrote the stories, the ideas in my language. So we must modernize, not westernize Africa. You know, we are all that we have. Answers to our future lie from within ourselves. And the only truth that matter in life, because we've been told lies about what life is. It's about this economic thing, it's about building high-rise buildings, flying in airplanes, it's about these jobs over there. No, life is much bigger than that. And the only truth that matters is the truth we discover for ourselves using our own internal language. Because life is the same for everybody. If you have somebody else define it for you, you're already lost. We have to experience life. You have to create things. We have to dream for ourselves. And no one, we can't delegate that. These are the highest values that create peace, prosperity, freedom in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that presentation. Quite an interesting story at the end there. It's also quite easy to explain certain things in your mother tongue as opposed to English. I think anyone can attest to that. Now we open up the floor for questions and contributions. Please use the hand reaction button, and we'll open up the floor for you to ask a question or contribute. Joshua?
Thank you. Can you unmute me?
Joshua, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say thanks, Prof, for broaching the subject. And I just wanted to add one caveat about learning our history, our African history, because part of it lies in us understanding where we are. I noticed that in a lot of our chat groups, by and large, majority of it, as it is, we are writing them in English. But whenever you break into any one of the local languages, you suddenly find people a bit mesmerized, and you begin to say, but you grew up in Kadoma, one of the towns. And in that Kadoma, you had so many communities, people speaking Nyanja, some speaking Chichewa, and suddenly you say, you don't understand that word. It is part of your upbringing that made you gravitate somewhat far away from it. As some of the people we have had the opportunity of traveling around Africa, it's amazing when you begin to discover the similarities, especially on the kind of things that Prof is talking about being African. Look, for instance, my name is my last name is Nyoni. I'm doing some work in South Sudan, and I write on the board. My name is Miemwa Joshua Matita Nyoni. An old man sitting in the corner there suddenly says, what does that word mean, Nyoni? And I say to him, what does it mean in your language? And he says, it's a bird. I said, yes, it's the same thing. Then he says, but you said you're from Zimbabwe. I said, yes. He said, oh, so you are Bantu? I said, yes. Those little pieces, those little nuggets, that's what we miss by concentrating on the other foreign things. And I always say the African Union has got a greater task because it needs to be promoting our understanding of who we are. And as a last piece, like in learning about who we are, I'd like also people to urge you to read Credo Mutwa's book, which says, Indaba, My Children, which talks about the African, the Bantu migration from up north right down to Kapstad, there where you meet it closer and Bantu start meeting, and then you end up having more clicks. But it's very important as part of us knowing who you are long before colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Nyoni. Any more questions or contributions? Please use the hand reaction button, and I will unmute you. Lionel.
Hello, yes. Greetings, everybody. Greetings, Prof. Hope you're well. Very interesting topic, and just wanted to hear your thoughts on a certain obstacle that I have personally found along my travels, and a form of rediscovery of my own identity and who I am and what it means in the matrix of things. My mother is of Ndawo origin, and my dad is of Zezuru background. I grew up where my identity was on one side. People would be on a subconscious level, would be doing little things, right, that made you aware of individual pride of who they were as individuals, right? And this automatically, then you see these different identities get cascaded under the one banner of Shona, right? And this is something when I started a different venture of what was deemed, what we called it Monemtapa Restoration at the time. Some people had an issue with the name, but we found that when we were trying to unite the different people who identified under different clan names, if you'd like, or languages, we have the Karanga, you have the Tonga, you have the Lemba, you have the Ndau, Manyika, and all the various different beautiful, colorful tapestry of what makes us as Zimbabweans today. They struggled with the word Shona, right? And we get put under this banner. I wonder, do you think that's something, again, which has been orchestrated by, because I say it's a bit unfortunate, because one of my grand uncles, Mr. Taone, Simon Taone, was involved in with part of the collaboration of the concept of, we learned what's called Standard Shona today. And this is basically a form of amalgamation of, the different dialects, which is predominantly Zezuru, which is taught in schools today. But then it marginalizes some of the Ndaus, the Manyikas, the Karangas, and the different people who we have in our landmass as we define as Shona today. Do you think it's healthy for us to continue with the word Shona in this current time? That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lionel. Alioni, Advocate Alioni.
Thank you very much, Prof, for a wonderful presentation. I just heard a little bit of it because my network wasn't that good. I just want to ask Prof, what should be done, or what is your recommendation in making our local language or our local languages great? For example, here in Zimbabwe, in terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, we recognize 16 languages, and among the popular ones we have the Shona and the Ndebele. So how best can we make those languages great? I can give an example. I've got a relative who is in Russia right now. He's studying medicine, but before studying that medicine for 7 years, he was asked to study the Russian language for 1 year. So I don't know, in terms of the Zimbabwean situation, what should be done so that also we encourage our local languages to be great, to be respected. Currently, yes, you know, Prof, yes, we have 16 languages in the Constitution of Zimbabwe, but it seems as if English is still dominating, even in our government offices, in many platforms. So, sorry, it was a long question, but basically, my question is, how can we make our local languages great? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. We'll take a question from Wiriranai, and then Prof can respond to the questions which were asked. Wiriranai?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Moderator. Prof, my question was on the issue of language. Like right now in Africa, there is a trend whereby the local languages are starting to be voiced out. And some people, even in educational institutions, are starting to write their theses in local languages, as well as the education system right now in Zimbabwe. The new curriculum is advocating for things to be taught, like mathematics to be taught in Shona, in Ndebele, and what. So does this road or this channel drive directly towards what we want, or the approach needs to be different for it to be more impactful? Like, should it be from the top down, or it should be from the down top for it to be more effective? Or what approach should be used for the issue of language to be spoken about on the biggest levels in the African continent, so that we get a headway in terms of making sure that we have pride in our own languages and we are able to make sure that it's not at par, it's at least above the other foreign languages. Because even if we see the issue of certifications, if somebody has got 5 O levels and doesn't have English, maybe they have Shona and other 4, they are still recognized as they don't have 5 O levels. So yet they have an indigenous language. So what can really be done so that things can start to shift towards a more African nature in which things can be done? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Wiranai. Over to you, Prof.
Sure. I mean, really great questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Prof.
Let me switch on my video. So Josh started off with, you see, all these questions are great and kind of interrelated. But if you Josh asked about, basically he's crying out loud as Credo Mutwa, Indaba, my children, because I would give a philosophical response to start with and say that where we are today is a situation where we have on the ground a reality which I've spent most of the time describing. We all know the reality, and that reality, if you go deeper in it, it will further divide us. It will never unite us at any level. At continental level, it won't unite us. at a local level, even if you, you know, if you look at Lionel's question, really he's hit the nail on the head in terms of the reality on the ground. You can go to all the so-called Shona groups if you want, and even if you went into the Zezuru group, you will find that they are also dividing. They will say, oh, he's speaking with, it's the Zulu from Buhera, it's a different to the Zulu from Toko, you know, it's if we go to the Kananga group, they are not speaking the same thing. Even that is differentiating in negative ways rather than differentiating in positive ways. So the bottom line is, from local level all the way to the whole of Africa is the same issue of the mindset tells you to compete and fight. It's the mindset still, which tells us to compete and fight instead of unite, instead of, there's absolutely no way somebody in Tanzania or Kenya or Rwanda or DRC Congo would be a different person to myself from Zimbabwe. We're exactly the same people, actually, and our cultural heritage is the same. So what makes us different in language disappears the moment you go into that language to find that we are describing the same thing. Our understanding of what family is more or less the same. Our understanding of our relationship with our ancestors is more or less the same. Our understanding of our relationship to our creator is more or less the same. The difference is around what Ngugi calls consciousness of a people is almost identical. The host is asking me to start my video. Is my video off? I thought it was on.
It was
okay.
We can see you, Prof.
Right. So back to Josh Unyoni's question, and the answer is not 100% the answer, but when you go into writings of linguists, or my favorite being Kwesi Pra, the Ghanaian professor, who has spent most of his professional life not only having identified that these are the same languages which are just working against each other, he even spent a long time here in Southern Africa, recognizing, here's somebody from Ghana, but he has come here and recognized, but all these so-called Nguni languages is the same language, whether you're speaking Swati, Ndebele, or you're speaking Xhosa, it's the same stuff. But the way the colonials took us to school, they would spell the same thing differently depending on which missionary colonized you and took you to school. They would spell the same thing differently. And I'm sure you will understand this, Lionel. You know, Lionel, you say you got Ndau heritage. You just crossed the border into Mozambique. You will have Ndau speaking people. But now they got Portuguese missionaries to show them how to spell. So if you go to Makate, Lionel, I'm sure you've been in Mozambique. The place, you won't even recognize it on paper because they spell it in a way that you would pronounce it differently, because you would write and pronounce Makate much differently from the way they will write it. So you go to Lesotho, Swaziland, South Africa, depending on what missionary created the first schools, these languages now appear different. The literature, the books are written differently. You can't recognize the language by the way it is written, but when it is spoken, you say, but what the heck? This shouldn't be written this way. So Josh, I keep saying it's a philosophical response in the end, because it boils down to what we as Africans are aspiring to achieve. If we really want to aspire a level of unity again, a level of connected again as Africans, we would swallow these differences. We would understand them to be meaningless, because when the white people first got here, the stories you hear in East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa are the same about how we viewed the white people when they got here. They're not different. I was laughing because although there are different stories, they mentioned the same thing. The favorite story in my part of the world was always that if you then saw 3 Africans and a European working together, you'd say there's 3 human beings and a European, isn't it? Because whatever it was, Lionel, in our languages, was never, it was always about who is human, okay? So, and you're quite right, the Zulus, when they say Muze Zulu, it meant you're African. Mukaranga, you're African. Mundau, African, because there was no Shona term to pull everyone together. It was always understood within the local linguistic context that a person. One of my favorite stories is in the 80s when I first started visiting East Africa, and somebody was telling me a story, which I don't know whether it's true or not, but it was still a nice story, and said, but you know where the term Muzungu comes from? Muzungu term meaning Murungu or a European, a white person. I said, wow, that would be interesting to hear the story. He says, well, you see, when they first got here and they hit the shores with their ship and they started walking in the mainland, people who were trying to relate to this new group of people say, who are these people? Which ones? Those ones. So Muzungu is they said Muzungu is basically trash that is brought on shore by the sea. So the sea is always going in and out, and when it brings trash to the shore, that's Muzungu. So it was always the same thing. You Africans never wished to borrow anything from the Europeans. We did not wish to adopt their color. We did not wish to adopt their religion. We did not wish to adopt their educational system or legal traditions and systems. They were systematically forced on us. But when you go back into our history, we were much happier with who we were. So now the educational system today reinforces the idea that we are all different. The way we were taught Shona at school was in English. You broke down every African language taught in a formal school is broken down using a foreign understanding of language so that the foreigners could analyze that language for you. When you study your local language at university, you are studying it in a foreign language. So Alion, this whole thing about how to elevate language back again, honestly for me, it's in 2 parts. The aspirational part and the practical part. The aspirational part I've already explained. If the desired future is to see how we are connected, how our narrative can be, how our stories can be told again, where the narrative was broken, and how we can continue to unite as Africans, so that not just because it's nice, so that we don't have this ridiculous situation where such a big continent and we start many smart people on this continent, 1 billion people harassed by any little country. If we look at Africa as a whole, every other country is small. It doesn't matter if it's China or United States, or even you put all of Europe together, they are small. If we are one, we don't even have to erase the current political boundaries. We just have to think and behave as one in terms of our point of connectedness. So if that's what we are aspiring to do, Alion, that's what drives us to swallow any pride around, oh, we don't pronounce it that way, or it's the wrong word to use, is not exactly us, is not part of us. That will disappear because that's how the others have done it. The Europeans don't come here and pretend they're not united. They'll be united because they want something from us. Their differences they'll deal with differently, but we are the opposite. Our differences are exploited immediately, and language is one of the problems. Local languages can be great again. I tell you, on the practical side, Alion, if we taught preschool in the first years at school brilliant stories in our local languages that are in the books, that are on the television, that are everywhere. Children don't discriminate on language. They will absorb whatever language. They are not born to say, we prefer English, we prefer French. It's what we teach them from the day they are born. If the entire knowledge-based system is based on a local culture, they will swallow it and they will pass it on to their own children. And that's what we are missing at a practical level, catching them when they're young and ensuring that they love it, because it's not about deciding to love it. It's about, I'm born in it, and they're going to be proud of it. So finally was a question, who is that from Wiriranai, about the local languages. Do we start from the top or do we start from the bottom? I've kind of partly answered that. But let me tell you something, Wiriranai, about the future. Without me being there, even when I'm gone, I know exactly what will happen to Africa because I've seen it happen in other parts of the world. Let me tell you two examples which happened in one place for me to realize, wow, my God, we can't run away from it. First example is in the United States, when I used to work in and out of the US. I would go to New Mexico, where you have Santa Fe as almost like the art capital of the world because of the Native American art. Okay, Native American art is one of the most sought after art in the world. And the nice, so I'll tell you two quick stories there. The first thing I learned, and they were teaching, I'd gone there with a group of our own Africans from the region, from about 7 countries. We were in Santa Fe. And the Native American artists were telling African artists, people, you are still doing what we used to do 50, 60 years ago, when we would be in our reservations, which is the same thing as our communal areas here in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and places where the Europeans put us in there like animals, where they take the best parts of the country. So I said, we realized that when you rush to these tourists with the pieces of art and beg them to buy it, oh, please just buy, I'm so poor, I don't have anything to eat, this is nice, just buy this one so that I can catch the bus. They say you get the lowest prices in the world. When we eventually discovered that it's me, the artist, who puts value on the product. It's not the tourist who puts value on the piece of art. They say, now we just create our art and we leave it there. It's either in the shop or on the road. My price is what shows there. If any tourist or art hunter comes up and says, oh, you're asking $100 for this? No, I think I'll give you $20. Well, the response is, oh, yeah, I understand. I know you can't afford my art. You only have $20. My art is $100. But if you shop around, you'll find something worth $20. Thank you very much. Okay. You get your price because you are the one who places value on it. But if you ask somebody else to place value on it, you're going to lose. That's the same thing with language. You see, if we place low value on our language, of course, it's going to go for cheap. And the knowledge associated with it will go for cheap. And the identity associated with it will go for cheap. So in Santa Fe, the second story is to do with the university that has been created there by Native Americans. Because young Native Americans, it's not older generation like myself, it's the young teenagers who are so emotional about learning their languages that were lost, recreating them, and the lost art, everything. They have created a university in New Mexico to recreate Native American languages, art, and culture. Young people are taking classes all the way up to university, because they can no longer stand the idea of being marginalized for the last 200 years and continue to be so. They are going back to their roots. African children that we are neglecting today will do the same thing with Irana. My generation may have failed to do it. Your generation with Irana may be failing to figure it out. But I can tell you, there are going to be generations of young Africans down the road who are going to say enough is enough. We're not going to have this nonsense. We are going to teach ourselves in our own language. We're going to be ourselves. We are going to sing our own song. We're going to tell our own story. And they're going to do it. So it's not about us even. Future generations are going to do it, whether we like it or not. So we just need to start making it easier for them to do it. In my final story, I've forgotten about the other story, all on Santa Fe as an example, was how I found Indians from India coming to Santa Fe to buy Indian art, which was bought 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. The Americans and other wealthier nations would go to India and buy Indian art for cheap, take it to wherever. And in this case, I saw with my own eyes, Indian millionaires and wealthy Indians and others coming back to the United States, specifically to buy Indian art and take it back to India. Okay. And paying in dollar terms more than maybe what the Americans may have paid for it 50 years ago, but they don't care. They're going to buy it and take it back to India because it's more than just art. It's an embodiment of a people's identity. So these things are going to happen with Iran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. We've got a question from Nyaradzi. We've got 15 minutes to go. So we'll take 3 or 4 more questions, and then Prof will answer and wrap up the session before I close it off. So Nyaradzi.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
All right, thank you. And Ndotenda Moyendizo, that's a very informative presentation here for us. Inini Zangu, I've just got one question, and that question is pertaining to our, for example, Tsumo Zedu. Kana tichitaura Tsumo tinoti bakuru vakataura vachiti ukarera imbwa nemukaka mangwana inofuma ichikuruma. So that is a shorter phrase, but then if you translate it into English, it will no longer make any sense. So my question is like, how much knowledge have we lost through those translations, etc., etc.? Because a lot of the things that we say in our own language, it also has to do with our culture and traditions and orality, etc., etc. So that's where my question lies. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Nyaradzi. Anyone else with a question or contribution, please use the hand reaction button and we'll unmute you. We have Lionel.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you for the response, Prof. I just got something came to mind when I was listening to you respond earlier, and I was thinking about the evolution of who we are as Africans. I conceptually, personally, I went on a journey some time back when I was doing some ancestry DNA and trying to decipher, because there was little whispers of different things, you know, with the coming of the Europeans and Arab influence and the Portuguese, etc., etc. And upon doing my ancestry DNA, I found that there was West African DNA. Well, predominantly, they call it West African, but, you know, among Cameroon, Tanzania root type of thing with the DNA, and some East African DNA that I had. I started digging through some literature, and there were some people who, again, there are forebearers within our literature that states that we came from Vambire, like Tanzania, or Kuruswa, or Tanganyika, and they found their way there. So some of the DNA, my ancestors' DNA confirmed some of our oral tradition. But today, when you see even the time of the pre-colonials, the African that was there in comparison to what's been encapsulated, what you capture in Cameroon or Tanzania, etc., we seem very removed. Like the Hadzabe people of Tanzania, they're the only Africans within Africa who, the only other Africans, like the San, who speak with clicking sounds. And they have hypothesized they're the kind of like the oldest Africans within Africa because the way they decipher language, that it will be the most, primitive language used with the sounds. Now with that, we have clearly seen an evolution before colonization, that we kept on evolving, kept on changing as we met and intermingled. How far do you think we're going to be more removed from where we are today? Do you think it will still have a footprint, like a DNA print of who we are or who our ancestors are, let's say in 100 years? That's my question.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Anyone else with a question, contribution, please use the hand reaction button and I will unmute you.
Hello. Sorry, Mr. Moderator. I just had to ask a question as the host. I wanted to ask Prof, how do we angle our linguistics, our vernacular, and all of these traits that we've been talking about today towards taking advantage of merchandising, the market, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Just a simple strategic overview of what you think we might need to do when it comes to us getting onto the market just by our language alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Simu. We'll take in our last question or contribution before Prof answers. Any questions? Contributions? Going once, going twice. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Kevin. So Muya, that asked a very interesting question. How much do we lose when we try to translate an African idiom in a foreign language? Actually, what we are losing is so enormous that it's not easy. I can't even describe it. I think the best way to describe it is what somebody said to me once when they received a message that some old woman had passed on in their family. She was in her 90s. And I remember the first words that he said to me when he got the news. He said, "Oh my goodness." I said, "What happened?" He says, "Wow, this relative, she's passed on." And I said, "Oh, okay. How old was she? In the 90s? Oh, maybe, you know." He said, no, but that's not the point. This woman, he said, it's like a whole library burning down. You know, this woman passing on is like a library burning down, not a book. That's how he put it. This is how those idioms and stories and the amount of wisdom we have lost through that loss of language is just incalculable. You have no idea. I mean, I told you about my writing the book Being African. I couldn't even write the book in a foreign language. I'd write it in my own language, although I thought I could write anything in English. I couldn't write it because, as you say, how do you translate that? How do you write that in English or French or some other language? So, and as I explained earlier, that today, ethnographers and other types of scientists are now finding out that as these indigenous languages get lost. You also lose the knowledge of the local ecosystem. You lose the knowledge of the local botany and biology. It's amazing, and it cascades to everything, to understanding of medicines, food systems, etc. So that's how important local languages are. You know, so and Lionel, you talk about or you ask about the evolutionary question, the DNA question. Yes, it's actually a fascinating question. I mean, we have all had our experiences, and Josh, when he came in earlier, was just talking about let's say the Bantu languages alone. My own experience with the Bantu language was in Kenya in 1984, when I went deep into, in fact, I can't remember the name of the district, and I was listening to them talk, and the way they would speak, I then figured out you would have a phrase, not a word, a phrase, 2-3 words which are perfect, Shona, and then the rest I could not follow. So I think after a while I said, "What did you just say?" So and years later I went to Burundi to go and have a look at the issue of the beer banana, the bananas. I was doing a kind of international assessment of the plantains and bananas. And in fact, I had never been to Burundi before. I landed at the airport, and in the mid-80s, that was before all this internet and so on and so forth. And you needed a telex to get a visa. I landed at the airport. I pulled out my passport. The immigration officer looked at my passport and said, "Can you stand on the side, please?" He had to interrogate me because my name sounded, he said, "You're from Burundi, you must be originally from here." And I said, "No, I've never been here. I'm from Zimbabwe." And he was not the only one. I mean, I spent 10 days in Burundi in that period. It was actually a bit of like late 80s, not mid 80s. And I remember being at every roadblock. I would be asked to come out. Who are you? When did you? So the names, the words, it's because our ancestors had no immigration policies the way the colonials created immigration policy, where your relative across the border in Botswana who is Kalanga, or across the border in Mozambique, in your case, Lionel. I mean, you are different people completely according to the colonial immigration policies. Our ancestors had a different understanding of immigration policy. People would, of course, compete and fight, but the fighting was never intended to be genocidal. It was always intended to either annihilate or overcome the other group. But the integration process would start immediately. The integration process would start immediately. So if we had not been colonized, it would be very interesting to know what that would look like. Because I tell you, like here in Zimbabwe, because I come from the southern part of the country, somebody if you sell to me, this one is Ndebele, this one is Shangan, this one is Zezuru, I immediately don't buy it, not because of anything. It's just my upbringing. We knew that I'm a Moyo. There were more Moyos who speak Ndebele than Karanga. They are there. So I kill them because I hate them, but they could actually be my blood relative. I could have more identical DNA with them than somebody else who calls themselves Karanga or Zezuru. So language, this is how you know that language is the most powerful form of identity. That's why we are having this discussion today. The idea that somebody who shares identical DNA with me speaks Ndebele because they were culturalized by the Ngunis, would immediately identify themselves differently, and I would identify differently from them. And yet, we're actually closer when it comes to DNA, Lionel. This is how powerful language is, and how it completely, if you use it positively, it will unite people. if you use it negatively, it will divide people forever, and yet they're the same people, unfortunately. So I see the future. The future is great for Africa. The future is great for Africa for two reasons. The first reason is that what used to divide us before due to colonial influences was reinforced by a level of consciousness which was derived mostly by Newtonian type physics. So it was a physical world. The physical differences were solid. You could not be the same. You could not even integrate. Now we know. Now the advancement of science is going to be to big advantage for the Africans, because the advancement of quantum physics and a deeper understanding of the connection between DNA, between the biology and physical aspects of life, the understanding of possibilities in life, all those are more in tune with African philosophies. Because like I was saying at a conference in the United States once, I was saying to them, and I was arguing around the lines of quantum physics. So time travel is possible. If you go into African history, somebody could actually time travel. And they would say, but that's witchcraft. Is that possible? I said, well, what we are talking about here is it possible? Is it not possible? Because that's not for us humans to decide what's possible and what's not possible, because what's possible today is quite possible tomorrow. The issue is what's your mindset. If your mindset says it's possible, that's what I'm talking about. So I don't have to prove that Africans used to time travel in the past. All I have to prove is that they believed it was possible. You see, I'm reasoning there, Lionel. The fact that Africans always believed that there's no separation between a physical and spiritual world, that all these things were possible, that your mind could heal your body. You don't have to be popping pills all the time. They could heal you through your own mind. Now science is proving that 90% of all diseases are due to stress. So there you go. So we have a lot in future. The future belongs to the African. And that brings me to the last point on the linguistics that Simukai brought. You see, once again, I'll say something that may be controversial, but at my age, I've spent a lot of time thinking through these things. And I was always trying to understand, why is it that Europeans and other foreigners are so scared of Africans? The hatred of Africans and the whole enslavement and colonial mentality to really brutally try to get Africans to succumb, maybe even disappear. Where is that coming from? And I ended up concluding, and I have no doubt in my mind, that Africans are the most feared people in the world, because we still embody the unknown. The center of origin of the human race is here. The DNA is the most diverse in the world. Making an observation, and I'll say it, but I was saying at my age now, I am beginning to process, trying to understand why Africa is in the position it has been, and why in all different ways people still try and take advantage of Africa. And I concluded that most of the rest of the world, especially Europeans, are scared of Africans or people of European origin. They are scared of Africans because, in my opinion, Africans still embody the field of all possibilities, the field of the unknown. These are people, I mean, Africans have the widest, human race started here. It didn't start anywhere, it started on this continent. And even after enslavement and diaspora and at home still show this kind of brilliance, which is rare to see in the other groups. So when you say, how do we monetize, Semugai, how do we monetize, how do we merchandise? It's very simple. We're already doing it. It's just that we're doing it for others rather than for ourselves. Let's take the field of entertainment. Okay. If it wasn't for Africans, there won't be rock music. There won't be beat music. There won't be music as you know it today. It wouldn't be there at all. Okay. Setting trends and fashions has always been the thing of Africans. Showing the limits of the human capabilities in different spheres has always been the thing that Africans do, even under suppression. So so people of African origin will always surface, even amongst the crowded field where you don't see many Africans. You will see the best boxer, the best golfer, the best racing driver, the best of, it doesn't matter what you touch. In the science field, you'll see the best scientists across the board. So just we had not gone through 500 years. Our destiny had not been interrupted, through colonialism. Just imagine what Africa would be today without foreign domination. Would be more peaceful than the rest of the world. That's why we are easy to because we never, it was always a people-centered society. So I would say that we reverse the whole thing on the world. The world is actually tired of products and from the West and now from Asia. The world is tired of this old industrial approach of producing products and services. So now the rest of the world is looking for something different. This is where we should come in, not just through the use of language and so on, but expression across all sectors. We are now going to have the best fashion designers in the world. It's happening. We're going to have the best architects in the world designing the kinds of buildings you never see anywhere. We're going to have the best in so many fields, and we're just not good at marketing yet. To help us there, because after all, they're just part of us. And like I said before, the reason they're not coming back is because we are not doing a good job here. If we were united as Africans and we made it clear that we are united at the highest level, we can be fearful at a personal level or individual country level if you don't want to offend anybody. But at an African Union level, we should not be afraid of anything. At a collective level, we should not be afraid of anything. Just tell the rest of the world, you touch an African, you've touched all Africans, and will descend upon you like a ton of bricks, because we are not going to accept that. You won't come to Africa if you do that to an African in your own country. Then you want to come here and masquerade. You won't do it. Okay, if we reach that position, the sooner we reach that position, it's not only safeguarding and protecting our people, it's making it clear you are safe in Africa. You will see people of African descent coming back more freely, feeling at home, creating more. We will have social and economic revolution. The renaissance of Africa starts with that self-assertion and then elevating our languages and cultures as a basis of economic growth, because all economic products that we consume today from the rest of the world, we are consuming other people's cultures. I mean, when you consume a hamburger, you're not consuming food, it's junk, but you're consuming it because you want to be part of a kind of American culture, where you eat junk and pay more for it. So there's absolutely no reason why we can have better quality products, better quality foods, and merchandised much more appealingly, and actually do both better than the rest of the world. Not sell people junk food, sell them really healthy food, fantastic fashion, etc., fantastic architecture. and become the most prosperous continent in before the end of this century. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that presentation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight. We now move the conversation to our Telegram and WhatsApp groups, where Prof will share his final sentiments on this topic. Remember, this is part 2 of a 5-part series. So next week we'll be tackling part 3. We will advise and notify on the topic on Monday. For those who want to catch up on last week's session, please follow us on our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi, where you're able to view last week's session. Thank you very much once again, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you. Good night.